Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to the Niche Cast on the 2nd of November, coming at you after the third World Cup loss in a row for the Blackcaps against South Africa. Well, it's not their third loss against South Africa, but it is their third loss in a row at the World Cup. Conveniently, all three losses have been against the best teams in the World Cup so far, and we will be reacting to the Blackcaps loss against South Africa in a jiffy. But let me just roll through some more podcast introductions. We are from the Niche Case, the niche-case.com, where you can take a moment to read about some Aotearoa sporting matters in the deepest, heartiest fashion. We've got Plunket Shield Round 2. Deep dive into Plunket Shield Round 2 is live on our website. We've also got both National League weekend recaps for you football freaks. So we've got the domestic cricket scene covered for you. We've got the domestic football scene covered for you. Both of which we also talked about in our subscriber podcast. So shout out to everyone with a Patreon subscription. Shout out to everyone with a paid Substack subscription. Generous folks supporting us on Patreon and through Substack. We appreciate your donations. We appreciate your generosity and your support in keeping the Niche Case flowing. And every week we deliver an extra podcast for those people as well, the subscriber podcast. And we may or may not be focusing in on those domestic matters next week as well. But this week we did go deep into the Plunket Shield and we did highlight some of the best footballers in the National League. So if you do appreciate the Niche Case, the website, theniche-case.com, the podcast, or even our newsletter that comes out every Monday and Friday, if you appreciate any of that, you can support it and fund it directly through Patreon or a paid Substack subscription. And there's an extra podcast for you every single week, along with 2 Niche Cast episodes every week as well. We've got you covered. We won't be reacting to the All Blacks World Cup campaign. Can't tell you anything about the Silver Ferns, the state of netball in New Zealand, but we can talk about Plunket Shield. We are informing you about National League football. Wellington Phoenix is a big thing. Aotearoa Rugby League. Deep dive on the Kiwi Ferns is also live on the website at the moment. These are the things we cover. These are the things we talk about, trying to big up all the fantastic Aotearoa sporting matters. It's all there for you. We're doing our best. 2 podcasts a week, 2 newsletters a week via Substack, a subscriber podcast for you every Wednesday, and of course, lots of deep dives on our website, theniche-case.com. It's all there for you. Tomorrow's our Friday newsletter. Probably be putting out some paragraphs about the Blackcaps, probably be putting out some paragraphs about the Aotearoa Kiwis versus Australia. And you may have seen a lot of free agency chat in the NRL as well, which is, it seems a bit like the Phil Gould stuff with the Bulldogs, where you hear about every single signing the Bulldogs make because Phil Gould he runs the Bulldogs and he's in the media. So like, you'll be like, oh my gosh, the Bulldogs are signing so many players. Well, it's just because you hear about it. And you hear about it because Phil Gould puts it out into the media about all these signings. The Bulldogs signed the hottest prospect from Queensland. The Bulldogs signed the hottest blah, 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 young player from New Zealand, all this other stuff. Phil Gould's just putting it out there. And that feels similar to the free agency stuff, where it's like the NRL media clearly don't want to cover International Rugby League. So instead, they want to drum up interest in the free agency. But the current free agency, November 1st deadline, that's for over a year away. So they're trying to drum up interest about a free agency window right now that is about players signing for 2025, which is absolutely ridiculous, especially when there's so much fascinating rugby league stuff happening, specifically from the Aotearoa angle. And that's it's always a fun time this time of year, coming into the Christmas period as well, because then I go deep into all the Kiwi NRL angles about which like trends and themes that are emerging. And I do have one brewing about the Cronulla Sharks signing massive forwards from Aotearoa. We've got a lot of Aotearoa Warriors junior content. At some point, they will name their junior squads. We're starting to get SG Ball squads announced, Malmaninga Cup squads announced, Jersey Flag squads announced. So there'll be a lot of Kiwi NRL junior content coming up over the next few months, all of which is far more interesting than NRL clubs signing a player for 2025. Like, that does seem a bit crazy. But how about this one? Joey Manu might be going to the Dragons in 2025. How about that?
Can we have him in 2024? Is that possible? Because, knowing the
Well,
Dragons, they'll stick him in the halves anyway, won't they? So,
like, I don't think you can have him at any stage. Like, I think Joey Manu, humble lad from Tokoroa, a very generous and charitable man, a very, like, just down to earth Kiwi geezer. I think he likes the Roosters, I think he's pretty content with the Roosters, and I don't see him going to the Dragons. But it's another headline. It's another free agency November 1st. How many players are coming off contract for 2 years away? Like, it is very crazy, very interesting. Not very interesting, but I am going to be dropping little nuggets in our newsletter tomorrow. A couple of little nuggets just to set the scene for the Kiwi NRL junior ranks. So check that out, along with some of the other deep dives. We'll be checking in with Women's Big Bash League stats, any further Plunket Shield notes and nuggets. And I think you're going to be dropping some information about Kiwis in the NBL, where there's a lot of Aotearoa flavour in the Australian NBL. Any little notes that you want to share just to set the scene?
well, I mean, this is one of the things I've sort of kept a semi-regular check-in on as far as those email goes. So I think we're due another one of those, particularly because not only is the NBL sort of however many weeks in, it's hard to say because the Breakers skipped out on 2 of those weeks, so they're behind everyone else, which gets a little bit distracting. But um, Breakers do have a couple good Kiwi lads doing some nice things. When Finn Delaney's been injured, they've been a worse team. That's not a coincidence. And there are dudes at some of the Aussie clubs doing lovely stuff. I think we've probably seen the end of Rob Lowe now that Joel Akil is back. So I think that might be I guess his professional career done. I don't know if he'll pop up in the Kiwi NBL again next year or not, but clearly from what he was doing with Melbourne, he's good enough to still be playing at that level. He's just chosen other priorities in his life, understandable. But also the women's competition, I believe, tipped off, I think, last night, and Melbourne had a couple Kiwi players getting nice little contributions there. Penina Davidson and also Tara Reid, who was in her professional. Well, I don't know if it's her professional debut or not. Definitely an NBL debut. She did go overseas to like Sweden or Finland or something briefly. I don't know if that counts as pro or not because it's foreign women's basketball. That stuff can be a little bit slippery. There's not that many women in the NBL this season, but there are a couple to at least keep an eye on. And the Melbourne Boomers will be one of the title contenders. So that's the team to support if you're looking for one of them from that Kiwi angle.
The
In fact, you might
Melbourne
just want to do the Melbourne double up because Shayley and Flynn Cameron are still at Melbourne United, even if Rob Lowe's done.
are they
Which I don't know if he is officially. We'll see how that goes.
are they affiliated? The Melbourne Boomers. The Aussies do love a boomer.
They do love a boomer.
Like, is that an Australian term, or is that just like, yeah, we're
I think it
Aussies?
might mean something different in Australia, but I'm not sure.
Because we do know there's a lot of baby boomers in Aotearoa and Australia, a lot of the older generation. So maybe they're just like a little salute to the boomers, because that's their Australian boomers are that's the national team, right?
Uh, one of them, yeah. One of them in one of the sports. I don't. Is it the men's basketball team? The Aussie women's team are the Opals. Might be. I was just this.
It is
There's
the
too many of these nicknames to keep up with, so I'm not surprised if other countries also find it difficult to keep up with the New Zealand ones. Like I think I have some sympathy when people get the Tall Blacks and the All Blacks confused and stuff like that.
The Australian Boomers are the Australian men's national basketball team. So
There you go.
Shout out Australia, shout out all the Boomers. Hopefully you're also giving some youngsters a crack as well. Right, and I'm sure
Yeah,
you'll be dropping.
I don't know if those teams are affiliated or not. Just to answer the original question, I wouldn't have a clue.
I'm sure you're going to drop some football notes as well in the newsletter. So we've got plenty of Aotearoa sport coming in our Substack newsletter. So we got everything covered, lots of different ways to get the niche cache. You're here absorbing the podcast on various platforms as well. So the niche cache is here. We're in the farms, we're in the streets, we're in the mountains of Aotearoa, just doing our thing, broadcasting Aotearoa sporting excellence. And before we explore some depression with the Blackcaps, let's get a bit of mindfulness just to ground ourselves.
Righto. Chief Arvol Looking Horse. I don't know who it is, but I'm imagining he is of Native American descent, just judging by the name. I feel like that's a safe bet. New Martin Scorsese movie is good, by the way, just on that topic. The quote goes, "Everything has spirit. Honor that." Five simple words.
Everything
with two lessons.
Everything has spirit. Honor that. The Blackcaps have a spirit, and we will honor that.
We'll honor it.
The Blackcaps' spirit is one of Aotearoa mana. Grit, grind, finding a way, adaptation, learning, growing, improvement, hard mahi. So here's hoping the Blackcaps can, find a new way of performing at this World Cup, because they have suffered 3 defeats in a row. But the first little wrinkle of positivity is that those 3 losses have come against the 3 best teams. South Africa are now first, India is second, Australia are third, and the Blackcaps are fourth. So if we're looking at the table, the top 4, they all have 4 wins. And then you've got Pakistan and Afghanistan on 3 wins each. The Blackcaps, they face Pakistan on Saturday night, I believe. Another little 6 p.m. kickoff for all the Kiwis. And then they face Sri Lanka 5 days later. Pakistan, they haven't felt that good at this World Cup, but they are 5th. They are right there with Afghanistan in hot pursuit of the Blackcaps. Apart from another injury, this time Matt Henry, and I'm sure we'll touch on that in a jiffy, I don't really think it's wise to view any of these 3 games like in isolation. By that, I don't mean like, let's dive into this loss to South Africa. What did the Blackcaps do wrong? What's going on with how they're playing their cricket? Because I think this run of 3 games, losing to India, then Australia, then South Africa, I think they need to be viewed collectively as a unit, as a middle stage of this World Cup, with the Blackcaps coming up against the best nations. And we know the Blackcaps don't lose to the minnows, which is England. And we know that the Blackcaps, they are capable of losing pool games and still making the semi-finals, and anything can happen in the semi-finals. What's your gut feeling from this little run of 3 losses during the middle of the World Cup? Are you sad? Are you quietly optimistic? Because maybe this just flips the whole storyline about the Blackcaps around. At one stage, they were cooking as favourites. Who can beat India? Well, maybe the Blackcaps can. Well, now the Blackcaps have lost 3 in a row, so no one's going to talk about the Blackcaps. I think that is an interesting way of looking at it. That's what I'm hanging my hat on. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a case to say that They won 4 games by beating teams they were expected to beat, especially now that we know that England are just like rat ass terrible. Shocking. So they suddenly are sitting in a similar category to the other teams we beat down the bottom of the table. And then we came up against 3 of the best teams, probably the 3 best teams outside of ourselves, whether or not we just like, you can't really argue the Blackcaps are in the top 3 now because they lost to all those teams. Playing off for 4th at this place, but that's there's still the opportunity to make yet another semi-final in an ICC tournament. Definite thanks to England for having a worse defense of their ODI World Cup title than the Blackcaps did of their Test Championship title. That's nice. Takes that pressure off. But yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit torn between it because on the one hand, there is that sort of schedule Hawken type idea of, well, maybe just the things lined up. If they'd split those teams, like you played India 2nd and then played Australia 4th or something and South Africa 6th, and you mix those games up, they'd be exactly where they are right now. And no one would have been talking about big winning streaks or big losing streaks. It would just be as simple as they beat the teams they were expected to beat and they lost to the teams that were a little bit better than them. But at the same time, I do feel like it's got worse with each of those 3 games. Like the India defeat was pretty noble, just beaten by a better team, sort of expected. India have been head and shoulders above everyone else so far, so understandable. Against Australia, batting, fantastic. Bowling, awful. Like it's awful at the start, getting absolutely pummeled. Then they actually pulled it back quite nicely. But then they let it loose at the end and let Australia get another 20, 30 runs more than they should have, which ended up being the difference in the game because bloody Pat Cummins or whoever it was smacking 6s. So that was sort of half a good game and half a bad game. And then they come up against South Africa and just were bad in both innings, like thoroughly dominated in both innings. It was not good. Even when they were keeping the run rate down against South Africa, they weren't taking wickets, which meant that South Africa could easily just make up for that run rate later on by going boom, which they did. So that's concerning. At the same time, there has been like the cumulative effect of injuries, and that cannot be discounted from what we're talking about here as a team that didn't have Kane Williamson, didn't have Lockie Ferguson, only got 5 overs of Matt Henry. And then, at that point, there was some weird rule about how, like, if someone else had to go off the field, you're not allowed to put your traveling reserves on as fielders for some reason, which meant that, but you are allowed to have, like, other, whatever the technicality is, I'm not sure. But for some reason, even though Tom Blundell's there, they wouldn't have been allowed to use Tom Blundell as a sub fielder, but they would have been allowed to use Coach Luke Ronke as a sub fielder by some weird rule. And there has been some chat about whether the squad should be bigger. And I think at this point, that seems fair. If you're going to have such a long World Cup, 15 players actually isn't that much. But like that's a holdover from smaller formats of this tournament. But there's, I don't know, like at the same time, if you're looking at the schedule stuff again and saying, beat the bad teams, beating the bad teams, losing the good teams, well then, at the same time, you shouldn't overreact to either of those two things. And you just have to see, well, where does Pakistan and Sri Lanka sit on this mix? Because they're somewhere in between. And the Blackcaps are clearly somewhere in between based on their results as well, which means like you just got to go out in these last 2 games. If you win them, you make the semi-finals. If you lose, well, you didn't deserve to be there because you lost these 2 deciding games. Like regardless of what happened before, they are set up in a position where they're still probably just edging that sort of expectation for 4th place, and I still hope they would get there. The weird thing is they just lost to South Africa, who they always beat at these tournaments. I think they hadn't lost to South Africa at a World Cup since like 2003 or something like that. They're definitely beaten them in each of the last 3 World Cups. I know that for sure. But Pakistan are our bogey team at World Cups. We tend to lose to Pakistan, and now we probably have to beat them, or at least lose narrowly and then thrash Sri Lanka. We might still get them through. But yeah, it's frisky, but they are still in a situation just like last World Cup where similar things happened. Do you remember the last World Cup? They started by beating up a few bad teams. So much closer wins that time than they were this time. So it's a bit more emphatic this time around. But then they did lose to Australia and England and Pakistan, I think. I don't know if it was all in a row, but they lost, considerable games during the sort of mid to late period of that previous group stage. They're just in the same position this time around. They started well, they stumbled, but they can still make the semi-finals if they sort things out from here.
If they can't beat Pakistan, I don't think they deserve to be a top 4 World Cup team.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you mentioned, defeating South Africa, at least one of those wins was in a semi-final, and
one was in a semi, and then the time before that, they beat them in the quarterfinal as well.
And I think, like, I feel a lot more confident about facing Australia, India, and South Africa in a semi-final than in pool play. It's just the way it is. Like, if the Blackcaps in a semi-final, they can do anything against anyone. But during this is a super grindy phase of the World Cup where it's just like, yeah, who cares about the state of the World Cup? But this is just a really tricky phase where you're playing a lot of games of cricket, and some teams are in a groove, some teams are already looking to the semi-finals, and I'm not surprised they lost all 3 games during pool play, but there's still that feeling of the Blackcaps can do anything in the semi-finals against these teams, and the 3 losses don't actually change that for me. I think that kind of sums up where the Blackcaps are at.
And if it was a semi-final or final, Matt Henry is not going off injured. He's bowling through that what seems like a precautionary injury, but the reason he goes off injured is because he's trying to preserve himself for a semi-final or final. Like there's a clear priority at play there.
It does seem like we were saying about this in the subscriber podcast yesterday, though, like battling through a hammy and an Achilles, like it's not the easiest thing to do.
Not ideal. Not ideal.
Just for an overview of some of the Blackcaps performers, there are 3 batters averaging over 40. And in a smaller sample size, so 5 games, 6 games, 7 games, less than 10 games, you want the averages to be really high. Whereas over a longer sample, like over the period of a career, averaging over 35 is decent, averaging over 40 is excellent. So I'll put the mark at 40 for a World Cup, 7 games. Mitchell, 69. Ravindra, 69. Conway, 46. What is interesting there is that Conway has only hit the 1 century. And I don't think Conway is going to finish this World Cup with 1 score over 50. That doesn't seem realistic, considering how awesome Devon Conway is. So you got Mitchell, Ravindra, Conway averaging over 40. That's pretty good. And then for the bowlers, you've only got Mitchell, Santner averaging under 25. And you also, another little interesting stat nugget here is that Santner, Ferguson, Phillips, Henry, Bolt, they're all averaging between 5 and 5.8 RPO, which is fairly solid. But then it balloons out with, Neesham averaging 10.8. Southey came in, he conceded 7.7, and Ravindra's on 6.1 RPO. So the bulk of the bowlers are pretty economical over the course of the World Cup. The less we see of Neesham bowl, the better probably, because he's also not snaring the super efficient strike rate that makes Jimmy Neesham a good T20 cricketer all-rounder. And you'd hope that you'd find some more runs from Latham. I'm not too worried about Will Young. Like he's doing all right. He's averaging 35. That's decent for a player like him. And of course, the main reason for Blackcaps' optimism at this stage is that Kane Williamson's played 1 game. He missed this game against South Africa, but if we know Kane Williamson and the power of his recovery, he won't miss any more games, I don't think, at this World Cup, unless he gets another ball to another finger, another digit.
Pick a new injury roulette with Williamson.
So there's obviously areas for improvement, and I don't know, you've still got some excellent cricketers in this team who should find a nice little groove against Pakistan. Like that's my gut hunch. We'll have to see what bowlers are available because we know Ferguson's got a niggle, Matt Henry's got a niggle. We haven't seen Ish Sodhi at this World Cup, and he's the only player who is yet to play for the Blackcaps out of their squad. So he might get a crack at some stage. I do think the one, because we are Blackcaps optimists, we are Blackcaps truthers, you might say. The only little weird thing is how consistent they've been with the first 11. And I don't think selecting the same players over and over again has helped with their injuries. Like, surely you could just give Matt Henry a spell at some stage. Surely you can just... They've managed Lockie Ferguson, but I don't think he needed to play a bunch of games in a row. And I think that tells you about how they're viewing this pool stage, where get some wins on the board, try grind it out, hopefully be in a position where you can rest some players ahead of the semi-final, then go full Hundies, first 11. But just rinse and repeat the same 11, specifically the same bowling attack over and over again, I don't think that is conducive with health and availability for these lads, because it's really hard to bowl. Like, if you're Lockie Ferguson, you're bowling in hot conditions on less than favorable pitches. Yeah, it's gonna take its toll. Matt Henry, what does he do? He hits the deck hard. He's doing that in hot conditions in India. It's going to take its toll. So I think that is a weakness of selecting the same bowling attack over and over again. Another one is, well, Australia knew what was coming. South Africa knew what was coming. Like, if you keep selecting the same bowling attack, you're giving the opposition chances to learn about what they're doing, get all the video footage sussed, and just come out swinging, which is what both of those teams have done. And I think you just need to mix it up a bit. You need to mix it up a bit for the health and availability, as well as giving yourself a better opportunity at attacking opposition batting lineups, as opposed to rolling out the same stuff over and over again and giving those quality batters comfort and knowing what is coming at them and knowing how they can attack those bowlers.
It's a tricky balance, isn't it? Because that slow and steady, consistent approach is Blackcaps personified. But when that works, they look calm and they look assured and they look just like they going through the motions is the wrong thing, but it's like going through the motions just at the highest level. Like they just look like such a slick, efficient cricket team. But when it doesn't work, they look like deers in the headlights. Like you look like you're just a possum freezing up when a car's coming. It doesn't know how to react. When you do the same thing and then keep losing. I mean, I was baffled at the toss when they won the toss and then decided to bowl first against a South African team that basically has, whenever they've batted first, they've put up 350 plus and one, and when they've bowled when they've bowled first, they've struggled to chase. I know the Blackcaps like chasing as well, and they're coming off what they did last time, but then also look what happened to them bowling first against Australia, as they got pummeled from the get-go. It was just really strange that they went immediately back to do the exact same thing. I don't know if there was a feeling of just like, shrug it off. We trust in our long-term processes and we reckon this is the best option, or if there was maybe an element of like, well, that's not going to happen again. And it didn't, but South Africa didn't score that much less than Australia did in the end, because I think they scored at like 12 and over in the last 10, or just a shade under that or something. Like, they destroyed us in the death. And we're not good death bowlers anyway. And the Blackcaps are set up to take early wickets. They didn't. South Africa is set up to not lose early wickets and then to just go. They lost when they lost their second or third wicket. I can't remember which one. And they, like, the commentators don't even know who's going to come in next, because they've got three outrageous sluggers just waiting in the wings, just all of them ready to go. It was David Miller in the end, but it could have been like I think Hyrik Klaasen or Marco Janssen's even been slugging pretty sweetly for them. Like, they had options, and that was kind of scary. Because that's kind of what the Blackcaps are trying to do with their ones, and they just haven't. They haven't quite hit that formula yet. But this is the injury things is unlucky, right? It's unlucky when you get these things, but there's still elements where you can control part of that luck at least. And one of those elements is what you're saying about just like maybe Lockie Ferguson doesn't need to play 4 or 5 games in a row or whatever, particularly in some of those games where we won them really comfortably and would have won them without Lockie Ferguson. Particularly when you've got a 10 over per game bowler and Ish Sodhi hasn't played a game yet. Like you could have given him a go in some of these more turnier conditions to spell some of these other dudes. And then the other factor that's counting against them here, and it's why the injuries have been so devastating to them in games when they've happened, is they're really only picking 4 bowlers in these lineups. They're stacking their batting in order to say, well, we can get 10 overs out of these sort of part-timers or batting all-rounders that we trust them to go through with the ball. Thing is, like, as soon as one of those other guys goes down, suddenly you need 15 overs or potentially more. It was Lockie Ferguson, I think, only bowled a couple in the game he got injured, and Matt Henry was halfway through his 6th over, so at least there was only 4.5 extra overs. But they were struggling to get through the other 10 anyway because Neesham got destroyed and Rachin Ravindra got pumped and so hardly bowled. And Glenn Phillips was pretty good until they brought him back to bowl in the death, and he got hit for a couple sixes. Like, where are we with the old overall stats? Rachin Ravindra has bowled 51 overs at a RPO of 6.11, and he's taken 3 wickets, average of over 100. But we know Neesham's been awful with the ball. It's probably why he dropped out of the first 11, is because they felt they could no longer trust his bowling. Bring him back, batted really well against Australia, almost got us home in that. But the ball has struggled. He's getting smashed. I don't know if that's working out for them. But then it's also not really working out for them having getting 5+ overs out of Rachin Ravindra, because that's not been happening lately, because he's coming in and he's going for more than a run a ball. That's concerning because it's leaving them extremely light in the bowling options, and it is asking a lot of their batting lineup to just be able to chase whatever anyone else sets. So some of the selection stuff has played into that as well, and it's left them vulnerable to an injury because they've only gone with the 4 frontline bowlers per contest. Wasn't such a fan of that from the start. I didn't really see the point of having Chapman batting at 7 when he could have just picked Neesham. But then I guess we've seen why they don't really see Neesham as a legit guy who's going to get through that many overs, because he's gone big. And it's also like there's other elements that have exacerbated things as well, because we're not taking very many early wickets. Didn't do it against Australia. Didn't do it against India, didn't do it against South Africa. And the reason they're not taking early wickets is probably because the ball's not really swinging at all. So there goes Trent Bolt's best weapon. Bolt's still bowling quite well, but it's just the wickets aren't flowing because the best element of his bowling isn't able to shine through. So some tricky stuff that they got to work through here. It's not easy to see how they do it with the options that they've got, but there are alternatives. They can sort some of this stuff out to some extent, and Pakistan are not the team that those other 3 are, and Sri Lanka are not the team that Pakistan are. So there's the semi-finals, to swing it back around, the semi-finals are still very much there for the taking, and it's just a matter of, are you a better cricket team than Pakistan? Well, prove it by beating them,
To one of your points there, the Black Caps have 4 bowlers who have bowled over 50 overs: Mitchell Santner, Matt Henry, Trent Bolt, and Ravindra. Bolt and Ravindra averaging over 30. Obviously, Ravindra is averaging 104 with a strike rate of 102. That is the only Black Caps bowler with a strike rate over 45, and it's 102. And Bolt's averaging 33. So at this point, I'm like, okay, so the Black Caps, we think the Black Caps are smart. We think we're Black Caps truthers. I'm thinking, are the Black Caps England or are the Black Caps smart? Because the stuff you said about the toss, that's what England were doing. And that's what we had a giggle about England. So it's like, well, because I also saw a story on Cricinfo about someone was saying how South Africa lack like an identity or like a plan in their run chasing. So what do? We put them into bat first, which is what they do best. So are the Black Caps...
they won the blueprints.
So are the Black Caps really silly, like England? or the Blackcaps taking the piss. And obviously they're not taking the piss, but they might just be thinking ahead. And also the team selection falls into that category as well, because England have also had weird team selections. So are the Blackcaps like England, or are the Blackcaps quite smart? And the only thing that came to mind as I was pondering all of that while you're talking, was maybe the Blackcaps are seeing that like this is a long tournament and conditions might change over the course of the tournament. The pitches might turn out a certain way later in the tournament, because you're in India and these pitches are like, yes, they might use a different pitch for each game, but they're from the same block. And at some point, those blocks are getting worn down, pitches are getting beat up. So spin might be a factor later on. They might be seeing something where like Trent Boult, Tim Southee, Kane Williamson, consistent IPL players, Santner, Devon Conway, they've played a lot of IPL. Obviously, Rachin Ravindra, he's from India. Ish Sodhi's from India. These dudes have toured India a lot. Like, there's a lot of information in that Blackcaps group about playing cricket in India and playing cricket at World Cups. Because, again, the Blackcaps make semi-finals of World Cups, and more recently, the Blackcaps are a certainty to make the final. There is a lot of ingenuity there. There's a lot of cricketing intelligence, a cricketing IQ there. And, you know, maybe Ish Sodhi's more valuable at the back end of the tournament as a curveball doosra. I don't know. Maybe they just like said, we're going to play these 3 games this way, because India batted second. But India probably won the toss and batted first, you'd say, because India have only batted first in the World Cup. So the Blackcaps, they might have said, we're just going to play these 3 games this way, see what happens. But we know we're going to attack the last 2 games and then really have a clear plan for the semi-final. Because what you're saying about South Africa, what you're saying about Australia, there wasn't a whole lot that we have come to love about the Blackcaps evident in those games. That's the weird thing. Are the Blackcaps really silly like England, or do they have a plan? And we both lean towards them having a plan. And I'm just curious how that plays out against Pakistan, because if they shit the bed against Pakistan, well, the Blackcaps aren't much better than England. And that's where we'll wait and see how things wash up there. I do want to highlight some Plunket Shield cricketers just quickly. We did go deep into Plunket Shield for the subscriber podcast, but I just want to highlight 3 of the in-form cricketers in the Plunket Shield so far. Scott Kuggeleijn, leading wicket taker. He's basically the best seamer in domestic cricket right now. He was the best seamer for New Zealand A in 2 series against Australia A. That has been parlayed into him being the leading wicket taker in the Plunket Shield, 14 wickets at an average of 10.9, most wickets with the lowest average. He's quite good at bowling, as is Nathan Smith. Nathan Smith, Wellington all-rounder, he's got 13 wickets at an average of 12.15. He is a really solid all-rounder for Wellington. He's been on the domestic circuit for a long time. He's only 25 years old, though. Started with Otago, moved to Wellington. He's got the Wellington development bump. That's evident in Nathan Smith. And I don't think he's like super fast. He might be early 130s. But he's a skillful, competitive cricketer who has taken a lot of wickets for Wellington. And he's always a decent player with the bat. I think he might have a Plunket Shield 100. He's scored a few runs in the Plunket Shield thus far. He scored 89 runs at an average of 22 in the Plunket Shield so far. And he does have a Plunket Shield century. He's averaging 26 with the bat over his first-class career. The one other player I want to highlight is Mitch, Canterbury wicketkeeper. Again, played for New Zealand A. I think he played one first-class game in Aotearoa against Australia A, and then he played one first-class game in Australia against Australia A. He's the leading run scorer. He's 23 years old. He's a wicketkeeper from Canterbury. He's got an average in the high 40s. He just always scores runs. That's what he does. Mitch Hay. You probably need to know about him, along with many other really good young cricketers in the Plunket Shield right now. Quick word about the Kiwis versus Australia. This is another interesting matchup. I do want to put it out there, like, defeating Australia is really hard. And I am not at the point right now where I expect to defeat Australia. I think the Kiwi Ferns, I'm closer to expecting the Kiwi Ferns to defeat Australia, but even then Australia sucked in their loss to the Kiwi Ferns. Maybe the Kiwi Ferns made Australia suck in that game, and the Kiwi Ferns were highly competitive in both their games against Australia, but it's still Australia. And I need to see the Kiwi Ferns win regularly against Australia for me to expect the Kiwi Ferns to win against Australia. I'm hopeful that the Kiwis can defeat Australia. I'm definitely not anywhere near expecting the Kiwis to defeat Australia, because in the tradition of trans-Tasman sport, this is basically Wallabies versus All Blacks. The Wallabies aren't going to defeat the All Blacks very often, and the Kiwis aren't defeating the Kangaroos very often right now. That is the fact. That's just how it is. And we can all be optimistic about the Kiwis, but it's really hard to defeat the Kangaroos. And it's been that way my whole lifetime. And until I see the Kiwis grab consistent wins against the Kangaroos, I will never expect a victory. So that frames the last week's performance and how I'm going into this week's the Pacific Championship final in Hamilton. I also don't like both. I think the Kiwis, along with Australia, they were kind of looking forward to this corresponding fixture. Couple interesting notes about the bench rotation. Tapine only played 32 minutes against Samoa, and that went up to 55 minutes against Australia. He was pretty good, but it just shows you how Michael Maguire is using the bench, because Griffin Neame, 27 minutes against Samoa. Leo Thompson, 49 minutes against Samoa. Griffin Neame, 11 minutes versus Australia. Leo Thompson, 35 minutes versus Australia. I think they can both play more minutes in the second game against Australia, having got that experience about playing against Australia in the first game. So I think they'll be better off for it, and you should expect to see more minutes from them. And I like Fish Harris. He was massive, 63 minutes against Australia. He's played 63 minutes in both games. Moses Leota, 46 minutes, then 49 minutes. I think the Kiwis just need that extra dose of power off the bench, and I would expect more Griffin Neame, more Leo Thompson, a bit more energy coming off the bench for the Kiwis against Australia. And it's going to be a home crowd, so hopefully there's a big home crowd in Hamilton, because when the Kiwis play against Samoa and Tonga and New Zealand, it's an away game. When the Kiwis play against Australia in Aotearoa, I think it's going to be a home game. And you'd hope for a massive crowd. Like, I think a massive crowd would do Aotearoa Rugby League a favour, and I think it would hopefully tell people, you know, what's cooking with Aotearoa Rugby League if they do get a big crowd in Hamilton. But like a lot of the stuff that I was thinking about before the loss to Australia still applies here. Dylan Brown's built for Test footy, bit more comfort against playing against Australia. Just more Kieran Foran, Fa'amanu Brown chemistry building with their combinations. And I don't think we saw the best of Shans Nickel-Klokstad, the combination, the slick passing out the back. But again, did they show all their tricks? Did they really flex out their quiver against the Aussies, knowing that you're going to play them again? The Blackcaps know they will play India, Australia, South Africa again. And that's just an interesting wrinkle through both competitions.
Yeah, I was, even before you said that, I was thinking about those parallels, because it's a lot of what we've been saying about the Blackcaps and hoping to be the case of them having like it's not a matter of like having one eye on the semifinals and letting these games go. It's just a matter of like being aware that still is the there's a more important winnable game coming up. The same thing definitely applies to the Kiwis last week, where they're playing in Australia with more or less, I don't know, the Kiwis have basically got the same team, haven't they? Have Australia got the same unit
I
backing
think
up
you've
from
got
one game
like
to the next?
Fa'atua Mala'aui's back, Payne Haas is back. Like they rested some of their big
Yeah.
forwards, which isn't good for the Kiwis. Like you couldn't quite defeat Australia with their with a slightly weakened forward pack. They bring back their best forwards, both of whom are kind of Samoan, which is the which I just find interesting. But the Australia will be stronger for this game, whereas the Kiwis are keeping the same team. I don't see any need for changes for the Kiwis. Like the Kiwis need to build chemistry, build combinations. There was some noise around Joey Manu, future Dragons player, making a positional shift, but that's never going to happen. Like Michael Maguire is just going to keep rolling out the same combinations through the series. And I think that could help the Kiwis in this game, is just selecting the same group again to fix what they did in Melbourne.
Yeah, and hopefully the strengthening of the Australian team is cancelled out by the home field advantage, and just sometimes that consistency makes a big difference though, because if you got dudes like whoever Payne Haas coming in didn't play against the Kiwis last game, there is still an element of having to catch up to some extent there. Whereas I guess, and I don't think that really matters so much from the Australian perspective, but I do think from the Kiwis perspective, there is a certain benefit from having faced Australia, seen where the standard is at, had a week to be like, okay, well, it's whether they've got stuff up their sleeve that they didn't show in that first game, but there's also just adjustments they can make with the experience of their first game from one game to the next, and saying, let's try this a little bit different. Let's maybe mix this rotation up or whatever. They've got that knowledge now. They've had that effective scouting opportunity. It's yeah, it's going to be a hell of a game, because I think this is definitely, um, as much as the Kiwis were not at their best last game, I think there's still a lot they can learn from that, and this is probably a better test or a better representation of where they're at, is what they look like at the second go around with a raucous home crowd behind them in a final. Effectively, it's a little bit of a goosey tournament, but it's this is still the final. This is what they've been playing towards. It's the last game of their short international season, and this is what that culminates in. How they go here means that, like, I'll put it this way: if they win this game, no one cares that they got smashed in the last one. Like that becomes irrelevant. So what they do here is the definitive point of where they're at in 2023 as an international rugby league team.
If the Blackcaps win the World Cup, no one's going to care that they lost 3 games in a
Exactly.
row.
It almost happened last time, and it's the same thing. No one would have cared. People have forgotten about how, like, not bad, but like up and down they were through the group stage at the 2019 edition, because they almost won. That's what matters.
My closing thought for the Kiwis is that the quartet, right? I've talked about the quartet for a few weeks now. Fisher, Harris, Leota, Joseph Tapine, Nelson Asafa Solomona. Only one of them's from Auckland, Moses Leota. I don't think they are going to let any team dominate them 2 games in a row. Because, like, as I've said a few times, Fisher, Harris, and Leota, they're 3 times NRL champions. And I think Fisher Harris has proven himself as the best prop in the NRL time and time and time again. Specifically 3 NRL championships in a row, and I don't think Moses Leota is that far behind him. They have proven themselves as the best duo. Tapine is pretty good, Asafa Solomona is pretty good, and knowing what I know about those 4 forwards, there's not very many times that they are physically dominated. It's not many times they are bullied by the opposition forward pack. And if it happens, I don't think it's happened again. It's like 2 times in a row. The only time it's kind of happened, and I don't even know if we've had this quartet too many times for the Kiwis, but it's happened against Australia a few times. And I think that is like their final frontier, is not letting Australia bully them. And I don't think they're going to let that happen on their soil, on the land of Aotearoa. I'll be very, very surprised if Australia's forwards dominate that quartet in Aotearoa. We also have Wellington Phoenix football in Aotearoa. We have the Wellington Phoenix, what do we got, women. They are facing Brisbane Roar, and we got a double header because the blokes, they face the Brisbane Roar afterwards. Straight up and down, what are the chances of 2 wins here for the Wellington Phoenix over the Brisbane Roar?
Yeah, I mean, probably slim for both of them. Like each of them, these are games that they can win. I think both of these teams are capable of beating anyone on their day. Yeah, well, maybe give or take a Melbourne team or two. Although Melbourne City, their men have been awful. They sacked their coach. They were 6-0 on the weekend to Adelaide and sacked their coach. So, yeah, I don't know. They did handily beat the Phoenix in the Aussie Cup, but then also that was the Phoenix midway through preseason with a new coach building a whole new system. So that what we saw of the Phoenix in those Aussie Cup games was like iceberg theory. You know, you're only seeing the very tip of what they're capable of. They're obviously building towards more stuff. Brisbane are, I think, ahead of the Knicks on both of these tables. The Brisbane women have won both their games. The Brisbane men, I think, have had a draw and a win. I think that's around the right way.
Yep.
So they're both pretty good. No New Zealanders involved on either side for the Brisbane Roar this season, which is obviously shameful of them, but it is one more reason why, although I was going to say it's one more reason why you don't have to have any kind of conflicted emotions or anything there, because you do obviously want to see the Kiwis doing well at those Aussie clubs. But then last week, the Kiwi that was playing for Perth against the Phoenix kind of helped them out a bit. So it might not be such a benefit. Yeah, I don't know. The home field advantage will count a lot. I think Brisbane are coming off a double header against Sydney where they won both of them last week, but Sydney, I think it was a double header. They've definitely both of them played Sydney so far. So Sydney FC aren't as good as you might have thought they would be. I think the women are defending champs, but they've lost a lot of players to European clubs, as often happens in the A-League. You win, everyone notices you. Your best players leave because they're not hanging around to win that title now. They've done it. They go. And the A-League men's is weird at the moment because I think Sydney last year with Sydney just won the Aussie Cup, and Melbourne City were the premiers last year, so the leaders after the regular season, and Central Coast were the champions. You take a quick peek at the A-League men's table after 2 rounds, you'll notice that there are 3 teams on 0 points. It's the Central Coast Mariners, Sydney FC, and Melbourne City. So I don't know exactly what's happening there. But yeah, just doesn't. Maybe that's part of hopefully Sydney just suck and Brisbane beat them because Sydney suck, and the Phoenix going to beat them because Brisbane aren't as good as it seems. But we'll see how that goes. They are only goal difference ahead of the Phoenix, and the Phoenix. Both Phoenix teams, because I think this is a rare example of the women actually getting to play in the big stadium, because a lot of their games are going to be moved around to smaller venues just for crowd bases, and also not just crowds, but also like higher costs and venue costs, all that stuff. So this is a rare opportunity where they get to play at home, but regardless of which ground they're playing at, when they play in Wellington, they need to be winning more games than not. And the men also need to be setting up their fortress at home. And here's a good opportunity for them to set a tone early on in the season by beating a decent team on both counts. I don't know if we'll get the 6-pointer on both counts, but I would hope at least one of them can snag a victory.
Is there like one kind of thread for each Phoenix team from the women didn't play last weekend, but the men did win? But a thread for both teams coming into this game against the Brisbane Roar that you think can help them get the W?
Well, with the men, I'd like to see how they further bring out their attacking ideas. We have seen limited stuff from them so far in that regard. To be expected. They were a bad attacking team before, so they've got to try figure stuff out with basically the same players and some younger guys replacing whoever else is left. So it's not easy to do, and I don't think we'll see Like we were saying the other week or the other podcast, whenever it was, like it's similar to the Warriors had a very, very good season, not throwing stuff out there in the NRL straight away. Like they built into their season, and we saw that's like a best case scenario new coach bounce. This, I don't think the Phoenix are quite ready to win over and over and over right now with a young team. I think that takes time. They might do it, but it's not certainly not obvious. They don't have like Sean Johnson, Tohu Harris type leaders at the top of their game to carry them through. But they've got some good players, and they when their first 11 is out there, I think they can be competitive against most teams, especially because we've been reassured so far that guys like Finn Sermon, Alex Paulson, they can carry the load. Lucas Kelly Hill, so some of these like the better of the young players are stepping up to mean at least they're going to have a very solid first 11, and it's just a matter of how well that first 11 can, first of all, stay on the pitch, avoid injury, suspension, and also like score some goals. That's a tricky aspect, but we've seen their transitional attacks, I think, is where it's at. And it's something they've clearly put a lot of focus on is when they first win the ball, just going forward as quickly as they can, getting runners in motion. The wingback sees that, the fullback sees that the midfield is stepping into a tackle and they're already running past them, knowing that this guy's going to feed them on the overlap or something like that, that kind of stuff. Get it to Zavada early and then run past him. Try create space out wide, stretching them, early switches of play from one side to the other before the defense is set, that kind of stuff, just like hitting them before they have a chance to get ready to defend it, counterattacks and stuff like that. And that's how they scored. Well, it's how they scored both goals and against Perth, but one of them was a goalkeeper passing it straight to a striker. There wasn't any kind of passing movement required, but it's still like you win possession, score a goal. The other one was Ben Old sliding in around halfway, winning an interception, and then a couple passes later, Bozidar Kraev is scoring. That's how they're trying to. I think that's one of the ways they're trying to score, but I think it's their best opportunity of scoring is those transitional attacks. So I want to see more of that. I want to see if they can be that combative midfield team who wins the ball, plays it early, gets out in front on the front foot, and scores, creates some chances at least. The women. I don't know, because I think we saw that from them last week. So maybe it's just a matter of backing things up. I would imagine Annalie Longo is back fit for this one, so that could be something to see how they shake up their midfield, or maybe she only plays off the bench. I don't know, but Macy Fraser's been pretty good so far. I don't really want to drop her. I like the combination having Kate Taylor, Grace Wisniewski in the midfield as well. I wonder maybe Taylor drops out and Wisniewski plays a little deeper if you want to have Longo and Fraser. There's some selection of options there, but I think with them it's just a matter of like, what have we seen their biggest issue throughout the first two seasons? Probably consistency, to be fair. Like there's littler issues within that, and scoring goals has been a problem for them, but they just scored 3 last week, and they've had games like the Canberra win last year where they've exploded with goals. What they've struggled to do throughout is put in performances back to back to back and go on winning streaks and deliver those kind of performances on the regular. So here's that opportunity. I think that's for them. It's a matter of just, you've had a great performance last time, which I don't even think was anywhere near what they're capable of. I think it's just a solid performance where they took their chances and scored a couple late goals to hammer it home. Well, can you do that again? That's the trick. And it's a difficult trick to manage, but we'll see how they go.
Beauty. That is the Niche Cast for this Thursday. Stay tuned over the weekend. A lot of fantastic Aotearoa sporting action, and we will try our best to be back on Monday to recap all of that Aotearoa sporting action. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube, whatever Apple or Spotify podcasting platform you desire. And make sure you check out our website, theniche-case.com, as well as the newsletter via Substack. Big up yourself, love yourself, kia kaha, stay beautiful, church.